Emma sat on her porch that Friday evening, watching the street grow quiet as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and let out a slow sigh. Life in Portland had its charm: the tall trees, the crisp air, the sense of safety in her neighborhood. But lately, everything felt muted. Ever since her divorce 2 years ago, silence had become her constant companion. She worked remotely as a graphic designer, spoke only in brief calls with clients, and spent her evenings alone with a book or a half-finished dinner for one. Her neighbor Daniel had moved into the house next door 6 months earlier. Emma didn't know much about him, except that he was polite, reserved, and quiet, much like herself. Their exchanges had been small: a smile when taking out the trash, a wave when they crossed paths at the mailbox. Sometimes she would catch glimpses of him carrying canvases into his home, paint smudges on his shirt, confirming what she suspected. He was an artist. Beyond that, he remained a mystery. That night, as Emma turned another page of her book, she heard a knock on her door. Startled, she set the book aside and walked to the entryway. It was rare for anyone to visit her unannounced. Opening the door, she found Daniel standing there, holding a casserole dish covered with foil. He looked a little nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Hi, Emma," he said softly. His voice was gentle, almost hesitant. I made too much food and I thought, maybe you'd like to share it tomorrow night." "Just dinner." "Nothing fancy." Emma blinked, surprised. She hadn't expected this. For months they had exchanged only polite greetings, and now here he was, offering dinner. She studied him for a moment. His brown hair slightly tousled, his green eyes warm but uncertain, the way he held the dish like it was both an offering and a shield. Her first instinct was to refuse politely. She wasn't used to company anymore. Dinner with someone, even a neighbor, felt strangely intimate. But something about his invitation felt sincere. There was no pushiness in his tone, no hidden agenda, just a simple gesture from one lonely person to another. "Dinner?" she repeated, her lips curving into a small smile. "Yes," he said, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "I'll cook. You don't have to bring anything unless you want to. Just join me." Emma hesitated only a moment longer before nodding. "All right, tomorrow night then." Daniel's smile widened, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "Great, 7 o'clock?" "7 works," Emma replied. They exchanged a quick good night, and she closed the door, leaning back against it. Her heart was beating faster than she expected. Why was she nervous? It was just dinner with a neighbor, nothing more. And yet, as she returned to her book, she realized she hadn't felt this kind of anticipation in a long time. The next day, Emma tried to distract herself with work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the evening ahead. She told herself it wasn't a date, just a friendly dinner, but part of her couldn't ignore the flutter in her stomach. She caught herself standing in front of her closet longer than usual, debating what to wear. Finally, she settled on a simple blouse and jeans, casual but presentable. When the clock neared 7, she crossed the small stretch of lawn between their houses and knocked on his door. Daniel opened it quickly, as if he had been waiting. The warm aroma of roasted chicken and herbs drifted out, making her stomach growl. "Come in," he said with a smile. His house surprised her. It was cozy, with shelves lined with books and paintings propped against the walls, some finished, others clearly in progress. The table in the dining room was neatly set for 2, candles unlit but ready. It wasn't extravagant, but it was thoughtful. "This looks wonderful," Emma said, her voice soft with genuine appreciation. "I'm glad," Daniel replied. "I haven't cooked for anyone in a while." They sat down, and as he served the meal, the nervous tension began to ease. The food was simple but delicious: roasted chicken, seasoned vegetables, and freshly baked bread. Emma found herself relaxing, the warmth of the room wrapping around her like a blanket. Their conversation began with light topics: work, hobbies, the quirks of the neighborhood. Emma learned that Daniel painted landscapes and portraits, often selling them at local galleries. He asked about her graphic design work, listening with a focus that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in a long time. But as the minutes passed, their words grew deeper. Emma spoke about her love for books, how they filled the quiet hours. Daniel admitted that painting was both his passion and his escape. There was a heaviness in his tone when he said it, as if those canvases carried more than just colors. They carried memories he wasn't ready to share. Emma noticed the way his eyes shifted when silence fell, as though he was holding something back. His gaze lingered on her longer than expected, not with boldness, but with a quiet searching. She wanted to ask him what weighed on his mind, but instead, she smiled gently and let the moment pass. By the time dessert, simple fruit and a bit of whipped cream, was served, Emma felt a strange closeness she hadn't felt with anyone in years. Daniel's kindness wasn't forced. It flowed naturally in the way he listened, the way he spoke softly as though every word mattered. When the evening ended, Daniel walked her to the door. He looked as though he wanted to say something more, but held back. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you for coming, Emma. It meant a lot." She nodded, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you for inviting me. It was nice." As she stepped into the cool night air and made her way home, Emma realized something had shifted. She couldn't put her finger on it, but Daniel's invitation had cracked open a door she thought she had locked forever. And though she didn't know it yet, that simple dinner would be the beginning of something that would change both of their lives. Emma stepped into Daniel's dining room, still carrying the faint nervousness from earlier. The table was modest but warm, set with 2 plates, simple cutlery, and a bottle of wine that caught the candlelight. She couldn't help but notice how carefully everything was arranged, as if he had put real thought into making the evening comfortable. The air smelled of roasted chicken and garlic, the kind of scent that reminded her of family dinners long gone. Daniel pulled out a chair for her with a quiet smile, and for a moment, Emma forgot her hesitation. She sat, smoothing the edge of her blouse, and glanced around his home. There were canvases leaned against the walls, half-finished landscapes, a portrait of an old oak tree, and a few frames with golden evening skies painted in soft strokes. The house didn't feel empty the way hers did. It felt alive, like someone had poured their heart into every detail. "You painted all of these?" she asked, gesturing toward the artwork. Daniel nodded, serving her a portion of chicken. "Most of them, yes. Some are practice pieces. Painting keeps me grounded. It's how I make sense of things." Emma smiled faintly. "They're beautiful. Peaceful, even." He met her eyes, his expression unreadable, then quickly looked down at his plate. "I'm glad you see that in them." They began to eat, and with each bite, Emma felt the tension soften. The food was good, flavorful in a way she hadn't expected. She complimented him, and he laughed lightly, admitting he had spent the whole day worrying if it would turn out right. That laugh eased her nerves even more. It wasn't rehearsed or loud, just gentle, genuine, the kind of laugh that carried warmth. The conversation moved easily at first, small talk flowing like water down a quiet stream. They spoke of Portland weather, of noisy neighbors down the street, of the local bookstore Emma loved. But slowly the words shifted, deepened. "I moved here because I needed change," Daniel said, his voice quieter now. He sipped his wine, eyes fixed on the glass rather than her. "Sometimes the walls of a place hold too many memories. You walk through the rooms and feel ghosts of what used to be. I couldn't breathe in my old home anymore, so I left." Emma froze, fork midway to her lips. His words carried a weight she recognized all too well. Her own house, though familiar, often felt like a museum of a past life. Photographs packed away, laughter replaced with silence. She understood what he meant, maybe too well. "That sounds heavy," she said carefully. Daniel nodded but didn't explain further. His silence wasn't uncomfortable, though. It felt like he was measuring whether he could trust her with more. Emma, sensing his hesitation, didn't press him. Instead, she shared a piece of herself. "My house feels like that too sometimes," she admitted. "I stayed after the divorce, but there are days it doesn't feel like home. Just a place where I exist." Daniel's eyes lifted to hers, and for the first time all evening, she saw something raw there. Understanding. Recognition. He didn't respond with pity or empty words. He just nodded slowly, as if her confession had lifted a burden from him too. The dinner stretched on, and they found themselves moving from sadness to lighter moments. Daniel asked about her work, and Emma explained how she designed websites and logos, sometimes for small businesses, sometimes for authors who needed book covers. He listened intently, his questions thoughtful. Most people glazed over when she spoke about work, but he leaned in as though every detail mattered. "Do you enjoy it?" he asked. Emma tilted her head, considering. "Some days, yes. Other days, it feels like I'm just filling the hours, but it gives me something to do, and that's enough." He gave her a small smile. "Maybe you need more than just something to do." The remark wasn't judgmental. It was gentle, almost like a mirror reflecting back her own hidden thoughts. For a moment, Emma felt her chest tighten. How could someone who barely knew her already sense so much? Later, after they had cleared the plates, Daniel returned from the kitchen with the bottle of wine and refilled their glasses. He sat across from her, his posture slightly tense now, as if preparing himself. "Emma," he began, voice low, "I need to tell you something, but I'm not sure how." Her heart skipped. His tone was serious, heavier than before. She tried to smile to ease the tension. "You don't have to tell me anything if you're not ready." He shook his head, eyes steady now. "No, I want to. I've carried it alone for too long." Emma placed her glass down, folding her hands in her lap. A quiet part of her wanted to retreat, to avoid whatever storm his words might bring, but another part leaned in, curious, even drawn. Daniel inhaled, then exhaled slowly. "When I moved here, it wasn't just for the scenery or the quiet. I left behind someone I loved, and I thought distance would help. But the truth is, leaving didn't erase the ache. It just gave me silence instead of noise." Emma's breath caught. She wasn't shocked by the idea that he had loved before. Everyone had their own history. But the way he spoke carried pain so familiar it pierced her heart. She wanted to say something comforting, but words failed her. Instead, she nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "I know that silence," she whispered. Their gaze held for a long moment, and in that silence, Emma felt something shift. It wasn't romantic yet, not even close. It was something deeper. The recognition of two souls who had both carried loneliness for too long. The candles flickered, the room growing quieter around them. But inside, Emma's thoughts grew louder. She had come expecting a simple meal, nothing more. Yet now she realized Daniel wasn't just a neighbor offering food. He was someone standing on the edge of his own storm, reaching out for connection. And though she couldn't predict what he might say next, Emma knew one thing. This dinner was no longer ordinary. It was the beginning of something she hadn't expected, and wasn't sure she was ready for. The next morning, Emma woke with Daniel's words still echoing in her mind. "I left behind someone I loved." It lingered like a song that wouldn't fade, pulling her thoughts back to him even as she made coffee and tried to dive into work. She told herself not to overthink it. After all, they had only shared one dinner. Yet the heaviness in his voice when he confessed stuck with her. It sounded so much like the ache she carried herself. By afternoon, she found herself glancing out the window toward his house more than once. His curtains were drawn, though light spilled faintly through. She wondered if he was painting. Something in her wanted to knock on his door, to ask more, to listen. But another part of her, the cautious part, warned her not to step too close. That evening, she decided to take a walk. The air was crisp, tinged with pine, and the quiet of the neighborhood wrapped around her like a blanket. As she turned the corner back toward her house, she saw Daniel sitting on his porch. He wasn't painting or reading. He was simply sitting still, staring at the sky as if searching for answers. "Evening," Emma called gently as she approached. He looked up and smiled faintly. "Evening." There was an empty chair beside him. After a brief pause, Emma climbed the steps and sat down. Neither spoke for a while. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was steady, like a tide slowly pulling them into deeper waters. Finally, Emma broke it. "You looked lost in thought." Daniel chuckled softly. "That's one way to put it. I was remembering the past, Sometimes it's hard to let go, even when you know you have to. Emma nodded, her chest tightening. I understand. I do that too. He turned his head toward her, his expression open but heavy. Do you? She swallowed before answering. After my divorce, I thought the hardest part would be losing my marriage. But it wasn't. It was the silence that followed. Waking up and realizing no one's there. Cooking for one. Even the house feels too big sometimes, like it's mocking me. Her voice wavered, and she looked away, embarrassed. She didn't usually let anyone see her cracks, but Daniel didn't flinch. His gaze was steady, full of understanding. I know that silence too well, he said quietly. After I lost her, I thought I'd fill the emptiness with work, with painting, with moving to a new place. But it follows you, doesn't it? Loneliness doesn't care about new walls or fresh scenery. It stays. Emma's eyes softened. She wanted to ask more. Who was she? What had happened? But she sensed he wasn't ready to open that door fully. Instead, she simply said, Yes, it stays. The porch light flickered on as the evening deepened, and they sat together, two quiet figures in the fading glow of twilight. Emma realized something unexpected. She didn't feel alone in her loneliness anymore. Sitting beside Daniel, sharing words few others would understand, she felt a strange comfort. After a while, Daniel turned, his tone lighter. I don't mean to make the evening heavy. It's just, I haven't said that out loud in a long time. Emma offered him a small smile, sometimes saying it is the first step to moving forward. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. You're probably right. The conversation shifted. They spoke about small things again. Books Emma loved, paintings Daniel wanted to finish, the best coffee shops in town. The heaviness didn't vanish, but it softened, like clouds breaking enough to let the moon shine through. When Emma finally rose to leave, Daniel stood too. Thank you for sitting with me, he said. It means more than you know. Emma hesitated, then replied softly, It means something to me too. She walked back to her house with a warmth in her chest she hadn't expected. Their loneliness wasn't gone, but somehow sharing it made it less sharp. The following days passed with subtle changes. Emma found herself looking forward to their chance meetings, at the mailbox, along the sidewalk, even in the grocery store where they laughed over both picking the same brand of pasta. Each interaction, though simple, carried a spark of something unspoken. One evening, Daniel surprised her with a knock on the door. She opened it to find him holding a covered tray. I made too much again, he said with a smile. Emma laughed. You're either terrible at portioning or very clever at excuses. Maybe both, he admitted. She invited him in, and soon they were sitting at her kitchen table eating his homemade stew. This time, Emma told him stories from her childhood. The summers at her grandmother's house, the long drives across Oregon, the way she used to dream about writing novels. Daniel listened closely, occasionally laughing, occasionally asking questions that made her remember details she hadn't thought about in years. In return, he shared bits about his own past. Growing up in Seattle, the first time he sold a painting, the fear and pride of quitting his day job to pursue art full-time. He spoke with a mixture of humility and quiet confidence, and Emma found herself drawn to the way he carried both pain and passion in his words. At one point, she asked, Do you ever regret leaving everything behind to come here? Daniel grew quiet, his spoon resting in the bowl. Sometimes. But then I think maybe I was meant to be here. Maybe some places aren't just escapes, they're crossings. Paths you're supposed to walk because of who you'll meet along the way. Emma's heart skipped at the way he said it, though she quickly looked down, pretending to adjust her napkin. She didn't know if he meant it casually, but it stirred something inside her nonetheless. Later, when he left for the night, Emma lingered at the door long after he walked across the lawn. She pressed her hand to the wood, steadying her breath. She had promised herself she wouldn't feel this way again. Not so soon, not with anyone. And yet, with Daniel, her heart felt like it was learning to hope again. But as she lay in bed, his words returned. I left behind someone I loved. The confession lingered, a reminder that his heart carried a history she didn't yet know. And deep down, she sensed that whatever story he hadn't told her yet was one that could either bring them closer or tear open wounds they weren't ready to face. The days that followed carried a gentle rhythm. Emma and Daniel had fallen into a quiet routine, shared walks, short talks over coffee, and the occasional dinner that left both of them smiling long after they parted. It was as if life had slowed just enough to give them room to breathe again. Yet beneath that comfort, Emma felt a current she couldn't ignore. Every time she remembered Daniel's words, "I left behind someone I loved," her heart tightened. She knew he hadn't told her everything. One Friday evening, Daniel invited her over. He had lit candles in the dining room and placed one of his paintings on an easel nearby. It was unfinished, brushstrokes of blues and grays forming what looked like a storm over water. Emma noticed how raw it felt, like a piece of his heart spilled onto canvas. "You're getting braver," she said, tilting her head toward the painting. Daniel gave a quiet smile. "Maybe it's because I finally have someone to show it to." Dinner passed in soft laughter and simple stories. Emma found herself relaxing, her guard lowering more than she had expected. But when the plates were cleared and the house fell into silence, Daniel grew distant. His gaze kept drifting to the painting, as if searching for courage in the unfinished lines. Finally, he spoke. "Emma, there's something I need to tell you." Her chest tightened. She set her glass down and leaned forward slightly. "All right." He drew in a deep breath, his eyes fixed on his hands. "Back in Seattle before I came here, I was with someone. Her name was Claire. We weren't just dating. We were planning a life together. We talked about marriage, children, the whole future. She was the kind of person who made everything brighter just by walking into a room." Emma felt a pang deep in her chest, though she tried to keep her expression calm. "What happened?" she asked softly. Daniel's voice dropped. "She got sick." It was sudden, unexpected. One month we were planning a trip to Italy. The next, we were sitting in hospital rooms more than anywhere else. I stayed with her through it all, but no matter how much hope I carried, she slipped away. And when she did, I felt like my whole life collapsed with her. The silence after his words was heavy, pressing against the walls. Emma's eyes stung, not just for him, but because she recognized the depth of that kind of loss. She wanted to reach for his hand, but she hesitated, afraid of crossing into something too fragile. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. "After she passed, I couldn't stay in Seattle. Everywhere I looked, I saw her, our favorite cafe, the park where we walked, even the art studio. It felt like living in a shadow. So I packed up, sold the house, and drove until I couldn't anymore. That's how I ended up here." He looked at her then, his eyes raw and searching. "I never told anyone that. Not really. But you've been different. Talking to you, being around you, it's the first time I've felt like maybe there's a way forward." Emma's throat tightened. Part of her wanted to cry. Part of her wanted to reach across the table and hold him. She understood now why his eyes carried both warmth and sorrow. He wasn't just a man who had left a city. He was a man who had left a life, a love, a future that had been stolen from him. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She thought of her own past, the failed marriage, the endless nights of silence, the walls she had built around her heart. It struck her how similar yet different their stories were. She had lost love through choice and circumstance. He had lost love through fate's cruel hand. "Daniel," she said finally, her voice gentle but steady. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore. You deserve to keep living. Claire wouldn't want you to stop." His eyes glistened, and he looked away quickly, as if ashamed to let her see his tears. "Sometimes I feel guilty even thinking about moving forward. Like if I let myself feel something for someone else, I'm betraying her memory." Emma reached across the table then, placing her hand over his. It was a simple gesture, but it carried all the compassion she could muster. "That's not betrayal. That's life. Loving someone doesn't end when they're gone, but it doesn't mean you can't find love again. Your heart isn't broken. It's bigger, because it's carried both pain and love. That's what makes you who you are." For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly, he turned his hand upward, lacing his fingers with hers. The connection sent a quiet warmth through Emma's chest. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was gentle, like something fragile finding room to grow. "Emma," he said softly, "I don't know where this will go. I don't know if I'm ready, but I want you to know that meeting you, it feels like the first good thing in a very long time." Her lips trembled with a smile. "I feel the same." The words lingered in the air between them, fragile but full of promise. They didn't rush, didn't try to turn the moment into something more than it was. They simply sat there, hands entwined, letting silence speak where words couldn't. When Emma finally left that night, she carried more than just the memory of Daniel's confession. She carried hope, the kind of hope that doesn't erase the past but dares to believe in the future. As she closed her front door, she leaned against it, her heart beating fast. She knew their journey wouldn't be simple. Healing never was, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to take the risk. Across the lawn, Daniel stood by his unfinished painting. For the first time since Claire's passing, he picked up his brush with steady hands. And as he began to add light into the storm on his canvas, he realized Emma had given him more than comfort. She had given him a reason to paint hope again. The night after Daniel's confession lingered in Emma's thoughts like a melody she couldn't forget. She lay awake, staring at her ceiling, replaying every word, every glance, every moment when his hand had found hers. For years, she had believed her heart was too tired, too guarded, too wounded to feel something new. But now she felt a stirring she couldn't deny. It wasn't just about attraction, it was about recognition. She and Daniel were two people who had been broken by life in different ways, yet somehow, they had found each other in the quiet of their loneliness. The next morning, Emma brewed coffee and stood by her kitchen window. Across the lawn, Daniel's curtains were drawn open, and through the glass she saw him at his easel, brush in hand, painting with a focus she hadn't seen before. The storm on the canvas now had streaks of light cutting through the gray. She smiled, realizing he was painting more than scenery. He was painting hope. Later that week, Daniel stopped by with a nervous smile. "I was thinking," he began, shifting his weight. "Would you like to take a drive with me tomorrow? There's a lake about an hour away. It's quiet, beautiful. I think you'd like it." Emma's heart skipped, though she tried to keep her voice steady. "I'd love that." The next day, they set out in Daniel's old truck, windows down, air filled with the scent of pine as the road wound through forests and hills. For the first time in years, Emma felt carefree. They talked easily about music they loved, books they once cherished, memories of childhood summers. There was laughter too, the kind that felt like water washing away old sorrow. When they reached the lake, it was almost sunset. The water shimmered gold, the sky painted in soft pinks and oranges. They walked along the shore, their footsteps sinking into the damp sand. Emma watched the way Daniel's shoulders seemed lighter, his voice more relaxed than before. At one point, he stopped and turned toward her. "Emma," he said, his voice softer than the wind around them. "Thank you for listening, for being here, for not walking away when I told you everything." She met his gaze, her chest tightening with emotion. "I wouldn't walk away. I know what it means to lose someone you thought you'd always have. And I know what it feels like to think you'll never smile the same way again. But I also know that sometimes life surprises us." Daniel smiled faintly. "You're my surprise." The words warmed her, but they also scared her. Emma wasn't sure if she was ready for all of this, yet she knew deep down that some part of her longed to be brave again. She reached for his hand, and this time there was no hesitation. Their fingers intertwined as naturally as if they had been meant to all along. As the sun dipped lower, Daniel led her to a bench near the water. They sat in silence, watching the last light fade. Then, almost as if he couldn't hold it in anymore, he spoke again. "Emma, when I lost Claire, I thought that was the end of me. I thought I'd live the rest of my life just surviving, never really living again. But you've reminded me that my story isn't over, that maybe there's still more to paint, more to feel, more to hope for. I don't want to rush anything, but I also don't want to pretend anymore. I care about you. Tears stung Emma's eyes, but they were tears of release, of something long locked away finally opening. Daniel, she whispered, I care about you too. And I'm scared, but I don't want to let that fear stop me anymore. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, hesitant, as though he was afraid she might break. Yet in that moment, Emma didn't feel fragile. She felt alive. The quiet stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of promises unspoken, of hearts daring to try again. For the first time, Emma leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't question. He simply let her be there, as if he had been waiting for it all along. By the time they drove back, the stars were out, and the world seemed softer, kinder. Neither of them spoke much on the ride home, but it wasn't silence born of distance. It was silence born of peace. When Daniel walked her to her door, he paused, his eyes searching hers. I don't know where this goes, he admitted, but I do know I want to find out. With you. Emma felt her lips curve into a smile, a real smile, one she hadn't worn in years. Then let's find out together. That night, as she closed her door, she didn't lean against it in exhaustion or loneliness. She stood tall, her heart beating with a rhythm she had almost forgotten. She realized something simple yet profound. Sometimes the greatest gifts come not when we're looking for them, but when we've almost given up hope. Across the lawn, Daniel placed the last brushstrokes on his painting. The storm had lifted, replaced by a horizon filled with light. For the first time in years, he felt the canvas mirrored his heart.